Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
It's the Fantasy Greeks NFL Power Hour, the August 17th edition. Time is running out, folks. Your fantasy drafts are creeping up if they haven't happened already. And we are here to help you get to that championship ring, that championship belt, that trophy, whatever it is your league hoists at the end of the season. And tonight, we will be going through the top quarterbacks of the league. I am joined, as always this season, by Sammy Bissett from thefantasygreek.com. Sammy, how are you?
Pretty awesome. Been a pretty good week so far. I went through one draft. Felt like I knocked it out of the park. Took a lot of preparation. But when you put in just a couple hours worth of work, it can make a world of difference in terms of winning your league or losing. So,
yeah. I did my first mock draft with the software that I have for my league. It's a keeper league. We keep 7 and draft 8. And I'm the back-to-back reigning champ, right? So I got the and it's non-snake. So I'm the last pick of the first round. And I made a trade to get the first overall pick, and then I sat down and did the mock draft, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, I pick first, and then I don't pick again until 24.
Yeah, it could be brutal. At least it sounds like you got a stacked team, though, or at least in terms of keepers.
Yeah, Carson Palmer, C.J. Anderson, Le'Veon Bell, and D'Angelo Williams, Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Cooks, and Kevin White I stashed on the IR.
Yeah, great start.
So here's how this works, kids. Sammy and I are going to talk fantasy football, and if you have any issues, questions, concerns that you would like us to address, the phone number to call in is 585-633-7487. That's 585-633-7487. Or if you have a Twitter account like everybody else does these days, you can tweet with the hashtag AskTFG, and we will address your concern as soon as we can. So, the number one thing, Sammy, when I think about, a draft strategy, and with the quarterback position, sometimes it's tempting to overreach because it's constantly beat into our head that this is a passing league and it's changing the role of the running back and the emergence of the running back by committee or the RBC is diminishing the running back's value, so it's a passing league. So your gut reaction almost is to jump at a quarterback, maybe a little earlier than you have in fantasy drafts past. Sammy, what's your advice on where you take a quarterback?
Now, with quarterbacks, there really is this is one of the deepest quarterback leagues or classes I can remember in a long, long time. You can get guys that are going to be ranked 15th, 16th overall that are still going to get you, anywhere from 16 to 17 points a week, depending on your scoring. There's guys like Tyrod Taylor that if you're in leagues that only have 4 points for passing touchdown that are going to be a lot more valuable. Cam Newton, of course, is going to be a beast with some of those mobile quarterbacks. There's a lot of really good young athletic quarterbacks that can get you yards on the ground and points. There's just a plethora of different ways. I mean, it's just the nature of the NFL. And so we really strongly kind of recommend that if you're new to fantasy, like you mentioned, do not overreach on a quarterback because there's guys that you can get in the 11th, 12th, heck, even in the 14th and 15th rounds in your draft that if you're just patient and build your roster with running backs and these great wide receivers that these quarterbacks are throwing to, you can really find a ton of value. Granted, you're not going to have an elite option like some of the guys we're going to discuss tonight at the top of our rankings, but you're still going to have very serviceable players. So really take a good look at how mock drafts are going, how average draft positions are shaking out. But just because you see one or two quarterbacks go in front of you doesn't mean you need to reach for like a Drew Brees in the 4th round or like a Tom Brady in the 5th. I mean, really be patient, really study the draft and the layout of your team, and pick a few guys that you'd be comfortable picking in the 9th or the 10th round, just in case the guys you want don't get there.
All righty. So we've talked in the previous couple weeks here as we've gone through the various positions about where players are going, average draft position. And I always default to the NFL.com site. Is there a specific site that you prefer, or do you use a bunch of sites?
Well, NFL.com is a really good one, particularly if you're going to use that site for drafting, because every single site that has a draft format is going to have its own individual rankings. And I think we do a pretty good job at the Fantasy Greek. And, of course, we got our draft guide on Amazon.com that you can purchase. We have all sorts of great content on the Fantasy Greek, and it gives you an array of different opinions. It gives you an array of different analysis. What I tend to do is I actually go to a site that the one I subscribe to most is called Fantasy Football Calculator. And what they do is that they have just 1,000 or more drafts just within a day or two of just they take so many different types of mocks, and you can style it from PPR to your standard league to your 2-quarterback league, and you can look anywhere between 2016 and 2007. It goes back that far. But I just kind of like to look and use it as a guide, and then I'll kind of move guys around depending on where they are. But, it tells you that Cam Newton right now is going 29th overall, which, he's a stud quarterback, but then Phillip Rivers was only 40 points behind him last year, and you can get him in the 90s or with the 97th overall pick. It's just a really cool format and tool to use during drafts, and it's a good way to kind of help you settle down and not have to worry about going through the strains of going through a top 300 list. So yeah, that's definitely something I would recommend, going through ADP sites and making sure that you're kind of sticking close with your draft guide.
Again, that draft guide is available on Amazon.com, and you can find a link for it right at thefantasygreek.com. But if you go to Amazon and search for Fantasy Greeks Fantasy Football 2016 Preview, I'm sure you can find that pretty easily. All right, so here we go, Sammy. Let's go through our top. We'll do a top 12 ranking today because 10 just isn't enough with these guys. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. Who's number 12?
Of course, in number 12, and we're going off of the touchdowns or 6-point passing touchdowns is what we're going through. Phillip Rivers is a guy, he's been really, really solid for multiple years, and I think we saw last year that San Diego just did not have a running game at all. The good news for him is that he has one of the PPR legend of running backs, Danny Woodhead, to throw to. He's also got a stud in Keenan Allen on the outside, and it's always important that a lot of these quarterbacks we're going to be talking about have a stud wide receiver to help them out. He's also got an awesome red zone target in Antonio Gates, and you just kind of look at Phillip Rivers. The arm talent's always been there. The yards have always been there, and the points. He's not afraid to throw from the goal line. He's not afraid to take shots downfield. But for him, he also has weapons short in the intermediate portions of the field and guys on the outside. And I really like the addition. I think something for Rivers that's going to be nice this year that he hasn't. He's had an okay option with Malcolm Floyd but Travis Benjamin, good wide receiver that they got from the Cleveland Browns this year, he's going to be able to stretch the field and give them a deep threat to help guys like Keenan Allen work in the middle of the field. So he's our number 12 guy right now. He has some great upside for average draft position. I see he's going right around. He's QB number 11 right now in terms of quarterbacks. But, the 11th or 12th overall quarterback, but for a guy who can end up in the top 8, top 7, we've even seen some years. So they're going to really depend on Rivers again, and that's a guy that we have at number 12 with some upside right now.
I'm really playing Rivers with the angle about what he did the last time Ken Whisenhunt was his coordinator. And he had a pretty fantastic year. And Wiz is back with Mike McCoy, who, some might say he's on the hot seat or whatever, and the window may be closing in San Diego, but I got a feeling Rivers is going to have a fantastic year. All right, number 11.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish it.
Oh, no, we're good.
All right, number 11.
Number 11, Big Ben Roethlisberger is setting up at number 11 right now. And I think his value took a minor hit when the Martavius Bryant suspension came out. I say that, But then you look back at 2014 where Martavius Bryant was on and off the field, and that's kind of the stat line we kind of have to go by, because having Antonio Brown and Bryant on the field kind of gives them a different look on offense. It doesn't make them as dependent on those check downs and kind of work in the middle of the field. So, I mean, the 2014 year for Ben Roethlisberger was pretty amazing. He had 4,952 yards, 32 touchdowns, only 9 interceptions. What hurts his upside a little bit is the fact that there's a couple question marks besides having Antonio Brown, stud receiver, easily the number one receiver in my book. That's going to get you 1,600 yards right there and quite a few touchdowns. But his number 2 right now is projected to be Marcus Wheaton. He's a guy who has had plenty of opportunities to really take that number 2 role, but seems to have kind of plateaued around 600, 700 yards a year. And it's not an ideal situation for a guy like Roethlisberger, who may have to throw a little bit more with Le'Veon Bell out early on. Then you have a guy like Sammy Coates. He is kind of a sleeper under the radar wide receiver. He's got a lot of potential, and he's really having a great camp, but you're kind of hoping for an unknown commodity there. And then, of course, Ladarius Green, all the fantasy metrics that you want to look at in terms of his athleticism and his ability to go up and get the ball. He's elite in terms of athleticism. However, he has battled some injury issues, and San Diego let him go pretty easily. So it just kind of raises another flag and just something that you really have to look at. The last thing I'll say about Roethlisberger, he's going to have a great running game, whether it's D'Angelo Williams or Le'Veon Bell leading the way, and he's going to have some great check down options there. Something to keep in mind, Roethlisberger takes a lot of hits. In that same year of 2014, which was a career year for him, he got sacked 33 times. He also lost 5 fumbles. So this offense is going to be pretty reliant on him in a lot of games, and it's going to be one of those situations where he's going to produce those 30-point, 25, 30-point weeks on a fairly regular basis. But he could also, he's been prone to give up the ball 2 to 3 times a game, which kind of limits his upside just a little bit. But it could be another career year for Roethlisberger, but it's one of those where he just barely missed the top 10, and he'd be a top 10 quarterback any other year. Just this year's so loaded, maybe you kind of hold off on Roethlisberger until a later round.
Last year, the Steelers were 60% pass in their offense, so not exactly a chuck-it team. But on the upside, regardless of what happens with Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams has proven himself a capable backup, so they will have a running game. So defenses will have to be honest, I guess, is my angle with this.
Yep.
All right, number 10.
Number 10, and it's a guy who was actually finished in the top 5 of most leagues last year. That's Carson Palmer. He has easily the most fun wide receiver duo to throw to, in my opinion. I mean, he's got Larry Fitzgerald. He has John Brown. Floyd is just, I honestly think Floyd's going to end up being the stud of this group. I know Fitzgerald is a really reliable PPR guy. John Brown is actually kind of battling a concussion issue, but they still have another great speedster in J.J. Nelson to back him up in case it's a long-term issue. Michael Floyd, though, just has all the tools, and I know we've said it for a couple of years now, but this could be the year he puts it together. And even if he doesn't, he's still going to get you 700, 800 yards and a few touchdowns, which only helps Palmer out. He's also got what we have projected as the best running back in fantasy football to throw to in David Johnson. He's going to end up somewhere around 60 to 70 catches this year coming out of the backfield. And we've seen him turn a 2-yard, 3-yard little check down into a 40-yard touchdown before. And Palmer's only throwing the ball 2 or 3 yards, but he just has so much explosive weaponry on this team to where he's going to light up the scoreboard with just throwing those little checkdowns. Something to keep in mind, he racked up his best season in 2015. He ended up with a QBR over 104, which is incredible. 4,600 yards and 35 touchdowns. He's easy a top 10 option. This is another guy, along with Rivers, has very high upside and with the potential to finish in the top 5 as well again this year.
So offensively, the Cardinals were 55% pass, but I bring that up in this instance, and along with the ranking, that the Cardinals were 19th in pass attempts, but second in yards, third in passing TDs, and first overall with net yards per attempt in the league. So Carson Palmer may not throw it as much as the big boys, but he gets you bang for the buck. Absolutely.
And another thing to keep in mind is that pace. It's all about pace with the Cardinals. And when Palmer is a good enough veteran to where he's going to tack on just 2 or 3 little cheap touchdowns just because he's rushing to get the troops in line. It's a veteran. It's a lot of veterans on that offense, a lot of crafty guys that are going to be able to exploit defenses. You've got the 49ers defense, you've got the Rams defense and the Seahawks defense. So you've got some pretty decent talent in that division, but that didn't slow them down last year. And I don't think it's going to slow down Palmer much this year, even though I do think they're going to try and keep running the ball a little bit more and get David Johnson to be the focal point of this offense.
Yeah, another Carson Palmer with six fumbles, only 1 recovered by himself that I can see really quick. So another one. All right, who you got for number 9?
For number 9, we have listed Kirk Cousins. Now he was he was the surprise quarterback of last year, and I there's going to be some issue with giving Cousins a top 10 ranking, but where he really falls and where his value lies, that maybe Roethlisberger and Palmer might be hurting a little bit, is the fact that his running back situation is a little bit more murky. And the fact that Matt Jones, he's projected to be the starter. He's a decent running back, and he's shown flashes that he can carry the load. That's what Washington is hoping for, at least, but that still remains to be seen. He has Chris Thompson and Keith Marshall also in the backfield, and they could be some decent options off of the bench. But this is a team that's going to be throwing the ball a lot, just like last year. And they have plenty of weapons with Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon. Those are names that aren't going to excite you from a wide receiver standpoint when it comes to fantasy drafts. However, they are guys that are going to be extremely dangerous. They're going to have several weeks where they open it up for big touchdowns, Jackson more so than Garçon. But then you've also got kind of undermentioned guys like a Jameis Crowder, who proved that he's at least another solid option. And then Josh Doxson, if he can find time on the field. We've seen how awesome he was at TCU. It's going to be an interesting year for Cousins, and the completion percentage was crazy, 69.8%, which is number 1 in the NFL. Awesome into the season. We're projecting him for 4,400 passing yards along with 30 or more touchdowns. And a lot of that is just because the weapons he has around him, and Jordan Reed, of course, being the main red zone threat. The weapons he has around him may not be elite, but there's enough really pretty good players across the board, and Cousins just doesn't have the running game to lean on. He's going to get more attempts than he probably should. But those passing, you don't really care in terms of the outcome of a lot of that, as long as Cousins is throwing the ball 30, 35 times a game and getting big chunks of yards. So Cousins at number 9 for us.
The interesting thing, in doing research and getting prepped, the Washington Redskins, and you think about, the drama that's been there with RG3 and all that, and they were a 9-7 team last year. They didn't make the playoffs, but they were a 9-7 team. They were 11th in passing yards in the league, and they were a top 10 team as far as interceptions, only 11 compared to 30 touchdown passes. That's a ratio on that team that I think you can live with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and he is going really, really late in rounds. He's currently going he's the 14th quarterback according to Fantasy Football Calculator coming off the board. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to take him as the number 9 quarterback, but that just kind of gives you an idea that that's kind of the 10th, 11th round where he's getting picked up, and that's just a great value for a quarterback who most weeks was right around the top 5. So he's going to have some stinker weeks, but I mean, there's going to be plenty of times where he's going to be throwing 300-plus yards a game with a couple touchdowns. And it's a bad division for defenses. So he's got that going for him as well.
He threw over 4,000 yards. I mean, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he was, I mean, kind of under the radar, if you will. You know?
Mm.
So, I got something for you.
You like that? You like that?
All right. So, Kirk Cousins at number 9. Who you got number 8?
Number 8 right now is Eli Manning. Of course, this is just like Ben Roethlisberger. He has a top 3 wide receiver. Beckham, of course, coming in as a surefire top 3. In some people's minds, he's going to be the number 2 receiver this year in fantasy football. But he does have some more question marks. The one rookie that I think has tremendous potential to be the rookie of the year is going to be lining up with Beckham and Sterling Shepard. The guy's a stud, and of course, he's having a great training camp. He's showing all the tools to be versatile on the outside as well as in the slot. Whether or not Victor Cruz comes back remains to be seen. They're going to need a third receiver, but they do have some capable tight ends with Will Tye. Larry Donnell, of course, is still around. Not the most exciting names at the tight end position, but 2 viable options that he'll have to work the middle of the field. And this is one of the things where Eli Manning, much like Kirk Cousins, is higher on our list than some others, is that Manning's his top 2 running backs right now are Rashad Jennings and Shane Vereen. And those are 2 running backs that are really, really good in the receiving game. Each of them are capable of anywhere from 400 to 500 receiving yards a game. And from the way the roster looks, they're going to be leaning on those 2 guys to do a lot of the catching out of the backfield. With no sure answer at the running back position, this is going to be another really pass-heavy year for Manning. And with the ton of interceptions he can be prone to throwing, he's very quietly had over 4,400 yards and 30-plus touchdowns in back-to-back seasons. I mean, you're looking for quarterbacks who are going to be chucking it a little over 500 to maybe 550 times. Well, Manning has thrown it 600 times or more in the last 2 seasons as well. So the Giants are still searching for answers in the running game, but the fact is Eli Manning is going to produce massive numbers, and even though he's going to make some bonehead decisions, it's not going to change the fact he's still going to average right around 320 yards a week just throwing the ball. So Eli Manning at number 8.
I find it hard to come to terms with the fact that Eli Manning could be flying under the radar. You know?
Yeah, and he's going to be a guy that when you click draft, it's not going to feel great. And he's going to be a guy who most weeks is going to be in the 6 to 10 range. But the thing is with him, he's a very solid quarterback who's going to keep you in a lot of weeks. And he's also prone with Odell Beckham, able to break things for 80 yards and for a touchdown on any given play, where he's going to really surprise and end up in the top 3. So with Manning, it's a big thing about consistency, even though you're going to have to fight through some weeks where he'll turn it over 3 or 4 times. But it's a very safe pick at number 8 that he's going to finish in the top 10 just because of the attempts alone. So doesn't feel good, but he's a guy who we're projecting at number 8 right now. So,
and if Victor Cruz comes back healthy and can be what we usually think of as Victor Cruz, then you might have 3 legitimate wide receiving options there to keep defenses on their toes. And like you were saying about them being, they're going to throw it. Last year, they finished 30th in points allowed and 32nd in yards allowed, and they didn't really upgrade that defense much at all. It's pretty much the same group of guys coming back. And Jason Pierre-Paul's hand's not walking through that door. You know what I mean? All right, sorry, bad joke. That was terrible. All right, now you got it, number 7.
Number 7, we have a guy who was pretty much coming out like gangbusters for a good portion of last year, and he's got 2 incredibly talented wide receivers. That's Blake Bortles with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their team as a whole is a sleeper for contending in the AFC South. covering the Texans, I got to see Bortles a lot, and this guy can make all of the throws. I think he has the potential, at least, to be on that next horizon of really good quarterbacks that are going to kind of be that next generation that we look to. He's already kind of approaching that top 10 in terms of on-the-field play, but as a fantasy quarterback, he's definitely a top 10 quarterback. Last year, him and Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns were just absolutely sensational. It was just fun to watch them, and it's one of those situations where they can beat you by his great arm downfield, and Hurns, of course, is more of a burner, and Robinson's got the big body to work the middle of the field. But they've also got some intriguing options in Julius Thomas and TJ Yeldon. That if they do pan out to be as good as they're looking on paper from a receiving perspective, you have a nice change of pace back there with Yeldon to complement the Ivory addition that they did. And then Julius Thomas, if healthy, has produced some very, very strong years as a fantasy tight end. So he could be a tight end one this year. The thing about the Jacksonville Jaguars is that they're going to be running a little bit more this year. However, I don't think that hurts because Blake Bortles had so much on his shoulders trying to carry that team last year that he threw quite a few interceptions. It was 18 total interceptions last year, but he still had 35 touchdowns, 4,400 yards through the air. Though the one thing that you have to keep in mind about Bortles is that he also has some ability to run. Nice, good, young, athletic quarterback. So he's sitting at number 7 right now. There's a lot of people that think he may regress this year, but we're kind of projecting him to be right in that 7 or 8 range, similar to last year.
I think, Ivory, I don't think is going to be a bell cow or anything like that, but he brings another element to that running game, and if they can, keep defenses honest, and you have Julius Thomas for an entire season, the sky's the limit really for Bortles. This season, you look at last year and where he finished. He completed less than 60% of his passes, but still threw for 4,400 yards, 35 touchdowns to 18 interceptions. Yeah, that number's a little high, but he's young. He's 23 years old. What will happen this year going forward? 35 touchdowns. You're talking more than 2 a game, which is just about all you can ask of a quarterback. Aside from, when we get to the top 3, the top 5, you expect more. But if Blake Bortles is sitting around and you're looking for, if there's a run on quarterbacks and Bortles is like one of the only ones left, I almost think that's the guy. Like if you're sitting there and you're looking at Bortles, Manning, and Cousins, and you need a quarterback, you can't go wrong. And I almost think Bortles is the guy to pick out of those 3.
Yes, and I agree. Bortles, to me, out of that group, has this doesn't sound too intriguing for fantasy purposes, but Bortles has the highest floor. So when you're looking at those guys that are in the 6, 7, 8, 9 range, guys that you think are going to be in the top 10, but you're trying to pick the safer, more steadier pick, I think Bortles is that guy that even on a bad week, he's still going to find ways to produce, while Manning can give you 3 or 4 turnovers a week, or Cousins, who knows with the Redskins offense if they don't have receivers stepping up again. Bortles has a bona fide star in Robinson. He's going to have a lot more help with the running game where the load is going to be lighter. And you just have to think, as a young quarterback, there is going to be more progression for him as the years go on. So I totally agree with you that out of that group of 3, Bortles is definitely the one to take. And that's why he's the highest of the 3 on that list.
All right, who you got at number 6?
Number 6 is the one that we know as the stud of 2014, Andrew Luck, absolute beast, and he's got a lot of speedy weapons on the outside. The one thing that Luck also has going for him, he still has an absolutely god-awful defense. So the Colts are going to have to throw. They're probably going to be working behind in a lot of games. But the thing that Luck has that a lot of people really kind of underestimate is that T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief are just way, way, way underrated in a lot of drafts. And they're guys that a lot of their production is going to be produced at a much higher level through Andrew Luck. He has Dwayne Allen there. I didn't love the fact that they let Kobe Fleener go. However, I think Allen is going to prove to be a capable back. And it's another one of these situations, and you'll find it's a very common theme between 6, 7, 8, and 9, that the running back group just isn't all that great. I mean, Frank Gore, you can pretty much pencil him in for maybe 750 to 1,000 yards on the ground. But realistically, he's only going to get between 12 and 15 touches a game. And they have guys like Josh Ferguson is going to be a guy that you really want to keep your eye on as a runner and as a pass catcher. I also think Philip Dorsett has some room to grow in that wide receiver 3 spot. He's going to become more of a boomer bust wide receiver every single year, but he's going to be a real big challenge for defenses. Now, we have Luck listed number 6, and he has really high upside, and a lot of people are finally starting to buy into that upside because Andrew Luck is the 3rd quarterback coming off the boards within the last few days, according to Fantasy Football Calculator. He's currently going 48th overall, which for me is a little bit high because that means you're drafting in the 4th or the 5th round. And you look at the fact he had all of those injuries last season, and the Colts tried to beef up their offensive line through the draft. I think they have a couple of good young players, but young being the key there. I'm not in love with investing a 4th-round pick into a really good quarterback, but one that still has some question marks along the offensive line. There's going to be, again, a lot of pressure on Luck to succeed this year, and he's going to come through, and he's another guy like Manning who has a little bit better arm talent than Manning, maybe a better receiving core than Manning, but he's a guy who's going to be asked to throw probably over 600 times again this year. But the fact that he also has some wheels is going to give him a little bit of a leg up in terms of value because he could also rush for 4 or 5 touchdowns any given year. So Andrew Luck is comfortably sitting at number 6. He definitely has some upside, but like we saw last year, it could be a gamble if that offensive line does not pass block for him.
He does have a new center this year in Ryan Kelly, first-round draft pick. So we'll see if that is enough. Who do you have at number 5?
Number 5, and we're breaking into the top 5, and I think these names are pretty similar across most formats. You're looking at Russell Wilson at number 5. Pretty amazing in the second half of the NFL season last year. The Seahawks got off to a really slow start, and Wilson was a really big part of that. But the last 7 games, he threw for 24 touchdowns, which you can't expect that pace to keep up. However, you can expect the fact that it shows his improved chemistry with guys like Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse, and another sleeper that we have this year in Lockett. The one thing Wilson has going for him as well is that his running back core is a little bit better with Thomas Rawls or even C.J. Prosise coming as a 3rd down back. And now I just wrote a piece about Christine Michael saying to maybe pump the brakes because we have a lot of good Christine Michael preseason highlight tape, but he's showing to be a viable number 2 running back, and it's going to be one of those situations where teams are probably going to have to load up the box some games, and Wilson will be able to exploit them through the air as well as on the ground. Jimmy Graham is another guy who I'm not expecting a massive year from, and he's probably not going to be back within the first week or 2, but Jimmy Graham is a guy who can stretch the field from the tight end position. Even if he's 75-80% of what he used to be, he's going to account for some extra attention on defense. And I think Wilson and the Seahawks, they're going to try and run first. However, I just think their pace is too good. I think Wilson is just too solid, and he's a pretty accurate quarterback. So Wilson at number 5, you kind of hope that he carries that strength, that streak over from last year. And, there's no reason why he can't finish in the top 3 this year.
You look at the trend on Fantasy Football Calculator, and his draft position is dropping. So if you find a way to steal him, obviously on the lookout for that. The X factor with Seattle's passing offense, to me personally, is Jimmy Graham, because as the season went on, it seemed like they got more and more comfortable, and his targets went up. September was an extremely dry month, although he did catch his only 2 touchdown passes of the season in September. But the number of targets went up in October, November until he finally succumbed to injury. So if he can be somewhat of a reliable outlet, with the likes of Baldwin and Lockett, who to me are not world beaters, but he's going to need someplace, a comfortable safety valve, if you will. And at 6'7", 260, if Graham's healthy, he could very well just be what Russell needs to put him over the hump.
Yeah, and just one quick warning flag about Wilson. He does take a lot of sacks. He's taken 40-plus sacks in 3 straight years. That's definitely something to keep your eye on. This dude is tough as nails, but at 5'11", 203, 205, depending on what site you look at, he's not the biggest quarterback. So if you're picking up Russell Wilson, depending on how their offense looks, particularly with the Rawls and how that situation works out, it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe dip back in. And I don't usually subscribe to getting 2 quarterbacks, but if a Phillip Rivers is available late, or if Roethlisberger for some reason falls way down to the 12th or 13th round, maybe you pair him up with Wilson, and maybe he's a guy that you kind of look at as, I have a top 5 guy at the quarterback position, but I could also pair it with somebody who can finish in the top 10 any given week on my bench, just in case Wilson gets hurt. So just a little bit of a warning flag there.
It's kind of surprising how many sacks he takes, because he is rather nimble and scrambling. It tells me that he's trying to not be Russell Wilson. You know what I mean? He's trying to stay in the pocket more. He's trying to let the play develop longer, where maybe his gut is telling him to run. He's trying to force the issue to be a quote-unquote NFL quarterback. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
No, and it makes sense. And I actually wrote about that in my offseason outlook for the Seahawks, is that at some point they have got to get him more help along the offensive line. Now, I know the Seahawks, they picked up Afidi in the draft. Not quite sure where he's going to start yet, but it's a lot of the same characters that weren't able to really protect him the last year or two. And they're just kind of switching guys around, kind of hoping for the right mix. But, at some point, whether it's making a trade in the offseason or something has got to give where they have to get better production from this offensive line. So Wilson doesn't, like you said, continue to get happy feet, and he's more willing to stay in the pocket and not have to run like crazy, which is what he's really best at, is breaking away from plays when there isn't a defender in his face after 2 seconds and a 3-step drop back. So offensive line is going to be something to watch out for early on in the season.
All right, number 4.
Number 4, and this is even after the suspension, I think we look at Tom Brady, and it's kind of nauseating unless you're a Pats fan to see him rank so high yet again. But he's one of the best to ever do it, and he gets it done with a relatively underwhelming-looking receiving cast. Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, Nate Washington, really teeny tiny, diminutive guys that have pretty good hands and that have the ability to work the short and intermediate parts of the field. But then you've also got the best red zone threat in football, in my opinion, with Rob Gronkowski. Now, there are a few troubling things, of course, Brady with the suspension, but Edelman finally came back to practice. He's been kind of up and down. We've seen some random reports where he's just kind of had a sidestep out of practice on 2 different occasions. Gronkowski had a little bit of an injury scare as well, but he's doing fine. I think Martellus Bennett is going to be another great addition. I'm not expecting him to be a similar combo to Gronk and Hernandez, but if he's 90% of what Hernandez was, I think you're looking at a tight end combination that is going to dominate the red zone in the middle of the field. Something else that Brady has that can't be overlooked, and he's keeps slipping in drafts, is Dion Lewis. Really good running back, really great receiving running back. And I know there's a lot of talk that it's kind of a split between him and LeGarrette Blount for who's getting a lot of touches out of the backfield. But the fact was, when Lewis was healthy, he was getting well over 60% of the snaps in the backfield. And he's a really great receiving running back. The Patriots always manage to find just the 5'10" burner running back who gets matched up on a linebacker outside. And it's just, this is a pretty crazy offense. There's a lot of great things going for it. The one thing that I think Brady gets overlooked for is he has a pretty great completion percentage as well. He's a very steady scorer most weeks. Right now, even with the suspension, he's still a top 5 quarterback for us. And it's going to be a situation where if you're feeling gutsy or if you're feeling really, really strong about your roster, you can get him in the 7th or the 8th round. Now, picking him and then picking another quarterback late, who's kind of in our top 15 that we'll discuss a little bit more about, could be a good strategy for you. But this is why it's important to mock and to get into draft rooms and figure out where Brady is going, because right now he is all over the board. Fantasy Football Calculator has him as the 7th quarterback taken off the board, but pick number 69 is still pretty high. That's in the 6th or 7th round. So as a fantasy owner, you really have to get with the fact that, hey, I can find a suitable replacement for the first 4 weeks until Brady comes back and becomes a top 5 quarterback. But right now we have him at number 4 for that reason.
Well, see, going back to kind of piggyback a little bit on what you said, I mean, yeah, he's going to be suspended for 4 games, and you got a bye week. So theoretically, there's five games out of your 13-week regular season that you're not going to be able to use him. But last year, his touchdown-interception ratio was 36-7. He threw for almost 5,000 yards, 4,770. Is it worth even worrying about? I mean, with a quarterback class so deep, like you said in the beginning, it's almost worth it to take him and then just, get somebody else to start 4 games.
And that's why we're really recommending kind of waiting on quarterbacks. And if you are lucky enough, it's one of those deals where most years Brady's probably going in the 4th or the 5th round just because he posts elite numbers on a pretty regular basis. With this year being the exception with the suspension, Brady is in that 7 to 8 range. And like we've been saying, this is such a deep class that you can get a Tyrod Taylor to fill in. You can get a Ryan Fitzpatrick to fill in. You kind of look at schedules and see guys that have really bad defenses, even though if they're not a tremendous quarterback, and maybe you're only getting 4 or 5 points less early on the first 4 games than you would with Brady. So taking a risk on Brady in the 7th or the 8th, loading up, and maybe your team starts out 2-2 or something, but then all of a sudden you have a top 3 quarterback in terms of points per game. This is definitely the year to take a little bit of a risk on Brady and ride out the suspension, in my opinion. So, yeah, completely agree with you. Pick somebody who's got a pretty easy schedule or someone that you really like with some upside, and then stash Brady until week 5 and just watch him take over the league.
All right, number 3 on the list.
Number 3, pretty regular customer, Drew Brees. He's just such a consistent quarterback, and it's one of those deals where he got over 5,000 yards almost in 2015, but he's had so many years where he's eclipsing 5,000 yards. But at 38, I mean, there's really not at 38, but he's also throwing for 30-plus touchdowns in 8 straight seasons, which is insane when you think about that type of consistency and that production. I really like him, same with Manning and Luck, to be a guy who's going to throw over 600 times this year. And it's one of those deals where you get to such a high passing attempt ratio that whether or not your receivers are elite, you're going to keep on moving up in terms of value just because you're going to be dependent upon a lot more. And one thing that he does have going for him in the backfield that he hasn't had in past years is Mark Ingram actually caught quite a few receptions out of the backfield. And he proved to be, even though he's probably a league average running back in terms of getting work between the tackles, he actually showed some flexibility in the passing game. But you also give Drew Brees, Coby Fleener at the tight end spot. It's going to be the first year in a couple years where he's had a really good shot. And I know Ben Watson had a little streak with Brees, but I think Fleener just is going to become a really good red zone threat, capable of 8 to 10 touchdowns this year. He's also going to be able to work in the intermediate portions of the field. He's also got a lot of speed working for him, as usual. Brandon Cooks is going to be awesome. He's a wide receiver, too, in pretty much any format. But there's guys like Willie Snead, Brandon Coleman that he has going for him that are also going to be able to stretch the field and just really solid receivers. And, the last weapon I really want to mention with Drew Brees is a guy that we've mentioned that he's going to be a stud rookie wide receiver this year. That's Michael Thomas out of Ohio State. This is kind of the guy that is going to fill a Marcus Colston type role. He may only get close to 500, 600 yards receiving. He may only get 40 to 50 catches this year, but he is going to get a lot of red zone looks, and he's a guy who's capable of probably getting close to 8 touchdowns this year, which just adds more value to Brees. Like we talked about with the running back situation, there isn't a true stud goal line back. They haven't had that since Chris Ivory left. Ingram is not bad, but he's not a guy that you can really depend on to carry a running game. So when you have one of the best quarterbacks that we've seen in the last decade, along with this much speed on offense, and the fact that their defense is not going to provide them with too many opportunities to have a lead this year, Drew Brees is a great target to find in your drafts in the 7th or the 8th round. So Drew Brees at number 3 for us.
The Saints are going to be the Saints. The Saints going Saint, if you know what I mean. When I say it that way, it sounded weird saying it that way, but you know what I mean. They're going to throw the ball.
Yep.
They were last year. They were looking at the numbers really quick. They threw the ball 667 times and only ran the ball 397 times. So you know what you're going to get there. And Brees, although he missed a game, was a little dinged up. 68% completion percentage for 32 touchdowns and 11 picks. 32 to 11, you can live with that. And Brandon Cooks seems to be stepping out. And like you said about Michael Thomas, there's no reason not to have faith in Brees again this year going in. Number 2.
Yeah, and like...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Brees finally missed the game. I mean, he's just one of those warriors who's going to get you. You can pretty much lock him in for 16. I guess 15 is the low number for him, games a year. So definitely a guy who's been pretty injury prone, knock on wood, right now. Brees being pretty awesome in terms of staying in for an entire fantasy season.
All right, who you got for number 2?
Number 2, and depending on what site you look at, Rodgers and Newton are going to be kind of battling out for the number 2 spot. I really like the fact that we have Rodgers at 2 this year, and all signs point to him having a really great bounce-back campaign. First this year, Rodgers is probably still going to finish in the top 5, so he has a really, really high floor, and he's got all of his weapons back as well now that Jordy Nelson is healthy. Randall Cobb is back, but he still has some really good, decent number 3 options in terms of Jeff Janis, Devontae Adams, if he ever gets his act together, in terms of learning the route tree, would be phenomenal for all of us. However, I mean, you still have Jeff Janis, you have Ty Montgomery that are all going to be battling for that 3rd wide receiver spot. The one thing that Rodgers had in an off year was he still had 31 passing touchdowns. So he's going to get you 30-plus touchdowns, which for a lot of those guys in the 8 to 10 range, they're not really going to approach that, or they may approach 30 touchdowns. Rodgers in an off year gets you 31 passing touchdowns. That's something you have to love. Completion percentage should go back up. It was pretty low at only 60.7%. We're projecting him to be kind of up around the 64, 65% range, which is what his career average is. This year, you can pretty much bank on 4,400 yards, 35-plus passing touchdowns, but he's also shown the ability to run and scramble in some situations. Rodgers is just a master tactician of the game. He's very smart with the ball. He hasn't had a double-digit interception touchdown. He hasn't had a double-digit interception year since 2010. So he's a guy who's not going to give the ball up a whole lot. Green Bay should be back on the track this year, and they're going to return to their elite offensive status. James Starks is a number 2 back who's proven to be, although a little bit boring, and he didn't please too many fantasy owners last year when he took over the number 1 role, but he still is a very good pass-catching running back. And the combination of Jared Cook and Richard Rodgers are 2 tight ends that one of them is bound to become a really good player. Richard Rodgers in some formats actually finished as a top 10 tight end, even though Packer fans will tell you he's just a really good blocking tight end. That's just how much Aaron Rodgers likes to work the middle of the field, and he's going to throw to the guy that's open. So there's a lot of fantasy points to have in Green Bay this year, but all signs point to Aaron Rodgers becoming a top 3 quarterback again, and he's number 2 to start this year.
Also troubling for the Packers last year was he took 46 sacks, which was, the previous 2 years before that, 28, 21. He did take 51 the year before that in 2012, but starting the season with his starting center, Corey Linsley, on the PUP list, which I'm sure he'll be back, fine. But that offensive line is a big question mark. And also, what I think fed into that was that Eddie Lacy and James Stark and whoever else they gave the ball to in the backfield, they couldn't run the ball for junk last year. And
they really couldn't. And it was tough to watch. I was a guy that bought into the Randall Cobb hype early on last year, and I took him in the 3rd round of one of my drafts because he was projecting to be he was supposed to get Jordy Nelson's targets. However, we clearly saw that he is not a true, I guess, bell cow of a wide receiver, if you will, in terms of being able to line up outside and just beat guys. He really struggled against double teams. With Nelson back and the fact that Nelson's back at practice, going near 100%, he's going to be ready for week 1. Cobb will not have to deal with those double teams. So look for a bounce back year with Cobb, just like you would look for a bounce back year with Rodgers. And look for a guy like maybe Jeff Janis or Jared Cook to break out this year as the 3rd receiving option on this team. So Rodgers had to hold on the ball a lot more because his receivers couldn't get open. There was just nothing right with Green Bay last year, and yet they still made it into the playoffs, and he still managed to produce a decent fantasy season. So he's going to have a lot more things going in his direction, and I expect that sack total to decrease and the touchdown numbers and yardage to increase massively this year.
All right, and that leaves number 1.
Number 1, going to Cam Newton, and a lot of it does have to go with how amazing he was last year. It was kind of, to me, there is some room for regression in terms of how accurate he was, but you can't ignore that he threw for 3,837 yards and 35 touchdowns. But more importantly, he only threw 10 interceptions. Now, he may pass for similar numbers and the touchdowns may go down just a drop, you would think, but then you get his number 1 receiver, Kelvin Benjamin, back. Even though Benjamin in his rookie year wasn't blazing a trail and wasn't a tremendous guy in terms of receptions and overall yardage, Benjamin was a really, really good red zone threat, and they drafted a clone with him and Devin Funches. He's having a pretty good camp, and he's projected to potentially take over the number 2 wide receiver route. And we talked about this a little bit before the Super Bowl, that the Panthers kind of had to retool their offense a little bit more, and they essentially just put 2 speedsters in Philly Brown and Ted Ginn Jr. on the outside and said, okay, we're just going to have you run straight downfield a lot of the times, and eventually you're going to beat these guys. It's just important that you go ahead and catch the ball. They've still got Ted Ginn as a speedster. I don't see a ton of regression for Newton in the passing game. I know I said he is a candidate for it, but you still have to factor in that he's a tremendous runner and the fact that he can pile up 10 touchdowns again this year. We talked about the wear and tear last year a little bit and how it would hurt him, but even going into the Super Bowl game, he was still going 1,000 miles an hour. He had a great game against the Cardinals, and I know the Super Bowl was a pretty bad look for him, but he's that type of competitor that I think is going to want to get better. And the fact that you give him his number one wide receiver back in a year where he was an MVP, sky's the limit for Cam. And I think it's one of those deals where his floor is probably that as a top five quarterback. So you're looking for a guy he's going in the fourth round in a lot of drafts, which is a little bit high for me. But if you draft well, if you have a lot of faith in your wide receiver and running back positions, Cam Newton in maybe the fifth round would not be a bad get. But expect him to be in the top two again this year, competing with Rodgers for number one.
You look at the 35-10 touchdown interception ratio. There's those kind of numbers are fantastic. He's not going to get you, like you said, a whole lot of yards through the air, but he does give you the possibility of getting rushing yards on top of that. You look at him getting Kelvin Benjamin back this year. Not having that target should have inhibited those numbers a little bit last year, but he managed to control the football. And as far as the wear and tear on Cam running, I don't really worry about it with him. And you know why? Because the dude is jacked. I mean, he's just a strong dude. He's built. You know what I mean? It's not like RG3. When Griffin runs, the guy looks like a bunch of twigs running around. He's just not thick enough. Cam is got more of that athletic build. I don't worry about him breaking down so much. But all of those guys, like you said, 1, 2, 3, probably interchangeable. We only got like 3 minutes left in the program. Who are some guys that maybe aren't on this list that maybe have some upside, some sleeper candidates for quarterback?
Yeah, and again, these are guys that you may want to pair in case you get a Tom Brady or something. But right now, Andy Dalton is going way, 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 way too low. He's actually the 18th quarterback, according to Fantasy Draft Calculator. And it's one of those deals where he has an elite wide receiver. And a guy that I really stress for people to keep an eye on is Tyler Boyd, a really good young rookie that they have. He has a red zone threat in Tyler Eifert. He has a really good pass-catching running back in Giovanni Bernard. Dalton is going to finish in the top 15. There's no reason why he is going outside of the top 15 right now, but he's definitely a candidate to look at as a guy who can produce anywhere from 20 to 25 points depending on the defensive matchup. He's also prone to chuck the ball up a lot, but he still has a really good completion percentage. So if you're able to get him in the 11th or the 12th round, that would be a really good find. Tyrod Taylor, the Bills weren't tremendous, or they ran the ball more than the other team last year, but Tyrod Taylor was a big factor in that because he was such a great rushing quarterback. I'm looking at him with Sammy Watkins, and if Sammy Watkins comes healthy, it's going to be one of those situations where Taylor's going to get you the typical 200, maybe 240 yards on a good week through the air, but he's still going to produce anywhere from 40 to 50 yards on the ground, and he's also a really good threat in terms of scoring touchdowns. So he's a guy to keep your eye on. I wouldn't qualify him as a quarterback one, but again, like I said, he's a guy with that running ability. If he takes the step up next year, could be a quarterback, could be a top 10 quarterback, depending on how the Bills kind of retool their offense. And lastly, Jameis Winston was a monster as a rookie. I think he's going to continue to progress, and I don't think Mike Evans is going to have a low touchdown total this year. I think him and Winston are going to have tremendous chemistry, and that's why Evans is slowly creeping up the board of wide receivers into maybe even being a top 7 or 8 wide receiver. Winston's going to be asked to do a lot, but he has another great tool, or he has another great pass catching option out of the backfield in Charles Sims. I think Winston's a candidate to maybe throw 3,500 yards and potentially 30 touchdowns, similar to what you get out of Eli Manning. So those are kind of three names that we have at the top of our list and guys that you really need to keep an eye on going into drafts.
All right, and with that, we are out of time. For Sammy Bissett from thefantasygreek.com, I am Keith Reeve from 87 Sports Fans. I want to wish you good luck with all your drafts coming up. Reminder that the fantasygreek.com's Fantasy Football Draft Guide is available at Amazon, and also if you just go to thefantasygreek.com, you can find a link there. Get a copy. Don't be that guy that shows up to your draft unprepared. They will all laugh at you. Have a great week, everybody, and may the odds be forever in your favor.